You're listening to the Haney Company Financial Guy Show. No nonsense, just a crazy mix of life, business, the funny, and of course we're going to talk about your money. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. What could go wrong?
All right, welcome to another episode of the Haney Company Financial Guy Show. I am always excited with the guests that we have on this show because they are incredible heavy hitters, movers and shakers, and John Bromley is no exception to that. So, John, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
I like to get the struggles out early because then everything else is easier. So, the first four questions are always the hardest. They require a lot of mental gymnastics and exercise. So, we're just going to get started with that. And the first one is, what is the number one place on your bucket list that you have not been to, but you want to go to as soon as you can?
Oh my goodness. Well, you're definitely right about this being the skill testing question because it has nothing to do with benevolence or charity. So you're throwing me a curveball here, my friend. Um, I've been fortunate to travel quite a lot, and I would love to go to Korea. I've never been to Korea.
Okay, I like that. And is there anything about Korea that stands out? That's why it would be a place of choice.
I don't know if I need to clarify, but maybe just to say South Korea is my intention. Um, I love the food. I've spent lots of time in Asia. I've always loved Asia. And when I was younger, living in China, a different story, my roommate was Korean, and him and I got along like two peas in a pod. And I just loved the guy, and he left me with a really great impression of the place. So, I've never been there. They got a lot of tech, wonderful food, really nice people. I'm in to give it a shot.
No, that sounds awesome. I have not been to Asia, period. So there's probably a whole bunch on my list that all fit that category. So that's fantastic. I love it. Good start. Here we go. Um, this is a favorite of mine. It's a newer one. But if you were going to start a band, John, what would be the name of your band?
Oh my goodness. You really should have I really should have got these questions in advance. So I'm not particularly musical. My older sister got all of that. I did used to be a hip hop DJ in university. And my name there was DJ because when anyone ever asked me how I got my name, I just answered with my name.
I like that.
I don't
It's
know
got
what my
legs.
band would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what? Can I call someone to help me out with this, or just
DJ
stick with my
because and
DJ?
the
Just stick
becauses.
with just start with my DJ story and go to the next one.
Hey, well, maybe that's got legs there as well, right? Because he added all these other people. You never know, right? We'll see. I like DJ because that in and of itself, I think, is a great place to land. I think you got all you need right there as a moniker. That's a good one.
Let's do it.
I love it. Would you rather explore, if you had the opportunity, either outer space or the bottom of the ocean?
Wow. Well, in today's day and age, you could actually say you, outer space almost seems more reachable, doesn't it? But I think I'd like to explore the bottom of the ocean. I
Okay.
mean, look, either way, if anyone offered me a ticket either way and it was past some version of a safety test, I would say yes to either one of those. I'm a curious person that does like to explore both in business and in life. Um, but yeah, the bottom of the ocean just sounds like this curious place that really no one's ever been when you get to the real bottom. So I'm in for that.
All right. I like it. But both of them are semi-terrifying to me. Maybe it's just all the movies I've seen of things exploding or not, sharks or I don't know what it is. Neither one really registers very well for me, but it's always interesting to kind of see if we're on one or the other. Because you're right. I think they both have so much potential in that framework of complete certainty and safety. That's my only catch, right?
Well, and hey, fear is an important part of exploration. So, I'm with you. I'm not saying I'm going down or up without fear, but I would be into doing either one, to be frank.
Awesome. Love it. All right, last one then. Besides this podcast, which of course is everybody's favorite, what other podcast have you listened to at any point that you think you would like to recommend to somebody else?
Well, I have really enjoyed what's his last name now? I'd have to check. Lex. He's really well known, and his last name is what is it? Friedman? Yeah, Lex Friedman. He interviews a lot of like really truly heavy hitters. His most recent one was Jeff Bezos, and he has and he's got a really long extended format. So you've got to be ready to sit down for, 90 minutes or even longer sometimes to get through his podcasts. But what that enables with some really, heavy hitting, famous, well experienced people is to get beyond the sort of, who you are, what do you do, and why is it important to you, and into some other really consequential discussions. So I've really enjoyed him, and I would recommend it to people who haven't heard of him.
I like that. And that sounds good. And, I think I think that's always a podcaster's challenge, right? How long and what do we do and how deep do we go? But that sounds good. Good stories with fascinating people, I think is always a good thing worth listening to. Like you said, if you got the time for it, right?
Yes, sir. Love it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we did the hard hitting round. Now it's just all easy and breezy from here on out. So let's let you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, because I found so much in your bio fascinating, but I want to hear your story, and maybe highlight the part of your journey that has stood out to you the most, that is the most significant as you're sharing.
Well, I characterize myself, especially at, here we are getting closer to the holiday season, and I characterize myself in Christmas parties and things like that as a charity banker. And partly because, people are like, what the heck is that? And partly because it's actually what I do. My interests are working with people and corporations to help them achieve the change they want to see in the world. And in this regard, the change that I specialize in is benevolent change. So whether it's charitable at law or just sort of socially good, socially responsible minded investment and or giving. And I do that partly out of heritage and my family culture, and it also happens to be where my subject matter expertise is. So I mean, I'm an accidental entrepreneur for what it's worth, and that is one of the interesting parts of my journey. I didn't sort of set out ever to become an entrepreneur. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur, but here I am as an entrepreneur talking with you today. Um, but my interest is really in solving a problem that I would characterize as generosity is natural, but knowing how to give charitably, for example, is not. And I'm really interested in working directly with people and corporations to help them work through and navigate and plan for and carry out their charitable giving. And why I put some onus on people and corporations is because it's really a donor-centered model that I'm interested in bringing about. Sales mechanics like fundraising, and corporate architecture in the charity world, just creating charities and foundations and things like that. It's something I've got a lot of experience and fluency in. But there's also a lot of very talented people who work in that space, coming from the charities worldview to target and capture the donor. My interests are much more like a bank, where it's like, well, regardless of whether you know exactly what you want to do today, you want to go about and achieve those goals. So how can I help you from, get from here to there, right? So whether the analogy could be an investment manager who helps people, retire working within their risk parameters and targeting sectors they care about, or whether it's a real estate agent who helps you find the perfect house for you that you still have to choose and pay for, right? That's really the role that I play in the organization I've started, which is called Charitable Impact, is really about enabling and facilitating those types of conversations and those types of activities at scale.
I love that. And I mean, that was the word that stood out to me that I just gravitated to, is I facilitate benevolence. It's the first thing you say in your LinkedIn profile. I love that. I mean, we could just plant and stop right there, because I think that that's not just impressive, but it's needed. And everything that you described about the landscape, I think you're clearly in the right place doing the right things. And I kind of want to dig into what you shared a little bit more, because yeah, there's a lot of people that I think are very willing to be charitably inclined, that want to give away their time, their talents, their treasures, and yet it's just not as easy as, push button, give to charity. I think sometimes we want to make it seem like it is, but I think it seems to be maybe a little bit more mysterious. And so maybe we could start by saying, what are some of the things that you've seen that have been challenges that you've been able to address? Like, what are the barriers that you've had to knock down in what you've done?
Well, first, it's to help people recognize or understand. That sounds a little harsh, but I love what you just said, by the way. So charitable giving isn't just as easy as like pushing a button and making it happen. I mean, actually it can be, because you can go to modern, websites and literally click a button and carry out the gift super easily. So the question is, becomes, well, why that organization and how are you going to feel about it, right? And so what it is to recognize is it's to help people recognize that, like, cooking well isn't easy either. Running a business well isn't, easy either. While I use these sports analogies a lot because I grew up playing a lot of sport, while kicking a ball conceptually is as easy as hitting a button to give to a charity, doing that well, doing that under pressure, doing that with confidence, doing that such that you feel good about yourself afterwards, that's the part that's actually difficult. And increasingly in today's world, there's really nowhere to go to learn about and experience charitable giving. It's not like you go to school and you learn it, right? You go to school and you learn math, and without that, you wouldn't become an engineer or an investment banker. Without sports clubs in our local communities, your nature of athleticism would never turn into a gold medal or a professional contract, let alone a lifelong, passion for skiing or whatever sport you're into. And so the big question that I'm really interested in, I mean, the biggest question at the top level that I'm really interested in is, where has that infrastructure gone for giving? Why doesn't it exist anymore? And how do we replace it? Um, and the reason why that question is so important to answer is because the decline of charitable giving that is happening today in 2023 and has been happening for the past decade at least is not because generosity is lacking. It's much more related to people don't really know how to go about transforming their generosity into the change that they want to see in the world. And along the way, they hit too many road bumps. They get too many bumps and bruises. And because they don't have the education and or the experience, people tap out instead of, getting back up, after, getting tackled on the soccer field and trying to win the ball back.
Oh, well, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I think that that's an interesting thing for us to recognize, right? That back to your point, yeah, we can just do some very easily in terms of money distribution, but it's that level of personal impact and the fact that I think for a lot of people, it's a lot more than just the money part. I mean, that's a major mechanism of connection, but it's that, you know, how do I see this materialize in a meaningful way, which was the whole reason why I sent it or pressed that button or did that to begin with. And I guess maybe if we say it that way, is part of the problem some of the places where the money's going that they're not like their stories are no longer compelling or like what are some of these things that are now missing that are kind of causing people some of this fatigue or disillusionment with the process.
Well, I love where you went there too. It's like we've practiced and advanced. But so it's like, there's bad restaurants out there, right? Or there's restaurants that you think are bad, maybe because of your palate, or maybe it's just objectively bad. But then the question would be, if you kept going there, like, why are you still going there, right? So this question as to, like, are the charities losing, t touch with us? Their stories aren't as compelling. Maybe they're not effective. To the extent that's true, and it's necessarily true because in the United States, there's over 1.5 million charities, right? They can't all be amazing. In Canada, where I'm sitting, there's over 85,000. So just like a restaurant, not all of them are going to be awesome, but more importantly, not all of them are going to be awesome for you, right?
Right.
Like, I like Korean food.
Yes.
You've never tasted it. You might have it for the first time and not like it. Doesn't necessarily mean, it's not your thing, right? Could become your thing with a little bit of practice. So without belaboring that too much, where I'm going is to say that I think the problem is actually, if I can be so frank, on the donor side.
Okay.
Donors don't know what they don't know. Donors aren't particularly literate when it comes to charitable giving. Um, and they're too quick to blame uh the the other party, right? So my bad experience with charity wasn't because I chose that charity that's not particularly interesting to me. It's because that charity is somehow bad. And what I'm not trying to say is, obviously the world's not black and white. It's not always, these are relatively complex things. What we're interested in saying at Charitable Impact, though, is to put the onus back on the donor and saying, like, it's true that it can't be possible that every registered charity is a good, super effective charity, particularly when there's no strong definition of that. Um, so you should take responsibility for your decision making, and you take responsibility with your own power and agency to go about and make those decisions. And if some of those decisions knock you down, get back up, because it's fun and meaningful to be a charitable person. Right? So you're not going to quit because it's cool to be charitable, even though every opportunity along the charitable journey isn't always going to be amazing.
Well, I really like that because I mean, I see that all the time, right? It's necessary. And I mean, I think it extends the type of mentality is necessary across a lot of the financial spectrum. You can't just sign up for a mortgage and never pay it, right? As an example, right? You'll run into a love letter from the mortgage company at some point that you won't like. I mean, there's a lot of, we have to continue to be responsible, but I think this takes on an additional component because you connect to the part of you that has a value and a vision and wants to see something happening in the world that is needing change, needing help, needing support. And I think that's if that's something that you say, I personally have this value and I want to see this happen in the world, and hopefully that's a commitment that you're willing to stay with and persevere through that journey to for as long as you're on this earth, you're able to kind of say, these are all the steps that I took to try to do whatever I could to make this better. Um, and I think, you know, having a framework that helps you stay on the path is really, really key. So what does that look like though, very, very practically?
Well, super practically, it means, I mean, my advice is start giving to things that you really truly love, like quote love, right? And for what it's worth, like philanthropy, the etymology of that word is actually love, love of mankind. So it really does relate to love. A lot of giving does relate to love. But what we mean by love, what I mean by love here is like, oftentimes like I love my wife, right? I also know my wife super well. So what we mean by love isn't just like you think you like it a lot. It means like you actually love it, even getting to know all of like more and more of its, more and more of its reality, including its flaws, right? So when you give to things that you really know something about, it's much easier to navigate, right? So one of the most important things is, for example, and why we think what Charitable Impact offers as a donor advised fund is so important is because it allows the donor to separate the actual donation at law that they get the tax receipt for from the decisions they make about, for example, which charities to support. And when you do that, you can play in the game of charity by making donations into your account, and then play the second part of the game, which is allocating that money well. On the allocating money well side, it's really important to start your giving journey at least by including things that you really understand well, regardless of its relationship to charity. Because when you do that, you can start to recognize where maybe some of your more technical charity decisions need some refinement or need more education and need more learning, right? Whereas just to play the other side, like, if you give to something that you completely don't know at all, right? Like, how could you ever even, where do you even start to judge, for example, whether or not the donation was effective or whether the charity's good at what they do? I mean, you don't have a foot to stand on.
No, that's really good. And I also love that connection. The word love. I think that that's such a critical framework to apply. I think I know we spend a lot of time in our practice talking about being values centered. And the more that we can be connected as human beings to the values that we have, and then finding ways to carry those values forward into all of our domains will allow us to be a lot more effective. And I think a lot of times we can be disconnected from that. You can work till you're blue in the face and you kind of lose your way a lot of times in certain parts of your life. So having that as an anchor, I think really does help, create additional levels of meaning that carry through to levels of impact. So I really like that element and that focus and that emphasis. And, there's also a lot of ways to be charitably inclined. So are there, in addition to the financial component, are there ways that you have found to help people, like if they wanted to actually do things, give up their time, the more intersectionality someone can have with things, how does that, benefit obviously all parties involved? And is there anything that you've seen play out that really gives maximum staying power and maximum impact?
We'll use this famous, can become an acronym if you call it TTT, earlier, the time, talent, and treasure, right? And so just to explain that a little bit, like everybody has time, talent, and treasure, right? So your time is your time, your talent is what you're good at, and your treasure are your financial assets and or your money. So the way to be most effective with your charitable giving is to align your time, talent, and treasure, right? So um, first of all, because it's very rare that people align their time, their talent, and their treasure behind something they're not interested in and know nothing about. So that covers my last point. And secondly, because like when you give money to a charity, just by way of example, and you want to know, whether that charity is quote good or not, a really good way to determine that is to go and spend your time with your talent volunteering for the charity to determine whether you really like them, for example. So, you know, if this doesn't sound like rocket science, it's not supposed to. Just for some reason, because charitable giving is this sort of nice thing that we're supposed to do every now and again, and because charitable giving is too often something people only do when they're asked to do it by a fundraiser in most cases, there's a disconnection often between your time, talent, and treasure and what you're giving to. And so, again, like focus on what you know, focus on what you love, and you're going to find that charitable giving is going to become a lot easier because the natural things in life that where you gain confidence by doing them and having experience with them and therefore learning more about over time is going to start to apply to your charitable giving. And it's not going to become easy all of a sudden, but it's going to become a lot more natural and it's going to start feeling like almost everything else in your life that take with some degree of seriousness.
Well, and you know, I was having this conversation with my wife about commercialization. You know, we're in the holiday season now, and how a lot of things become, you know, over commercialized, or we kind of create this sort of social pressure around certain things. And not that every social pressure any of us experience is either inherently good or bad, but sometimes it's a lot of this, we have to do something or we're supposed to, our parents did it. And it's either you start to almost connect negative emotions to it in some respect, especially if you didn't have this great experience or you felt like you're being forced to do something that wasn't aligned with who you are, and or it's just the kind of part of the show, and you're not really, it's kind of just it's a completely disconnected experience. It's all part of one of the things that is interesting in the United States. I don't know if this is also happening in Canada, but there's literally at just about every grocery store, at so many stores now, they'll ask you to round up your payment, and it goes to some kind of a charity. And I have to imagine, again, I get the logic behind why that's so simple. I mean, you're getting capturing little pennies here and there, which in the aggregate can actually add up to a decent amount. And probably most people are like, sure, why not? And while I think that there's a level of value there, I also come back to the point that we're talking about, right? Like, how meaningful is that? And can you be lulled into this sense of being charitable without it actually being something that's of substance, and that you remain committed to and connected to, and almost like you check the box mentally. And I really I love this, like going back to this whole framework of let's get all three T's in alignment, because that's kind of where the magic happens, right? And that's where the maximum element of impact I think we'll see over our lifetime comes from. Um, and probably enjoyment too, right? We should enjoy all parts of that to some degree.
I mean, if you're spending too much time doing things you legitimately don't enjoy, and I would say, stop. I'm not some kind of life coach or something, but like, especially when what think you enjoy, like, also doesn't, make you a better person, right? Like, just by way of example, I don't know, not everyone who I know who does exercise, quote, enjoys the exercise, but they enjoy, how it makes them feel about themselves, after, and they might enjoy that meal that they don't feel as guilty eating after, and they enjoy, maybe living a longer life with more mobility, et cetera, et cetera. So, and again, charitable giving in this respect, it just needs to be looked at life the way we look at other things that we take really seriously. I love your example of the roundup at the cash register. Let me just speak to that for a second. So when you say, is it meaningful? The question is who for? I can tell you that the amount of money raised at cash registers is a lot, okay? Because, your 50 cents with my $1.25 across the scale of people who shop for groceries, makes for some big, big money. And so that money is very meaningful to the charity sector. It's very meaningful to the relatively few charities who receive that money. So it's meaningful there. But is it meaningful to you?
Right.
No, no, right? So I'm a charitable person. I choose voluntarily to give money away like all the time. I happen to give it every month, and the company I work for matches my donations. So I got 2 for 1 to up to a maximum, and I give that way. So when I get to the grocery store that asks me for money, and yeah, um, when we're not playing hockey, we do other things in Canada, include shop for groceries. So um, so so when I get to the grocery store that asks me for money, I say no. And to be honest, like I sometimes feel bad. I almost got a shoulder check to kind of go like, who heard me say that? Now, I wish the world wasn't that way. Having said that, it's fine. It's a pressure tactic. It's a part of fundraising or sales methodology. But I'll tell you what would happen, what would need to happen for me to say yes every single time I was asked that question. If my own impact account, now I'm talking about my donor advised fund at Charitable Impact, was attached, through technological APIs to the grocery store, or some mechanism, then every time they asked me to round up, I would say yes, knowing that that money was going into my account for me to allocate to things that I love. That's the future, by the way. And the reason that's the future is because grocery stores care more about the people that shop with them than they do the charities that they might choose to give money to if they had extra money to give away, right? So it's not to say grocery stores don't care about charities. It's just to say that grocery stores, in my business experience, recognize who their customers are and what keeps them afloat. So the trick in the future with particularly corporate giving, sorry to shift gears a little bit here, but the trick in the future for corporate giving is um, it's today what corporations do is they give money to charities and then they try to spend, a bunch of time, talent, and money to tell everyone how wonderful they are. And the problem is no one really cares or notices. And the reason they don't care or notice because it's not the charity that their customer would choose. And so the future is give money to your customer for them to give away. Employee corporate giving, matching programs are going to become more and more of a thing. Customer giving programs where you earn sort of a charitable rebate at the tail every time someone um, um, shops with you is going to become a thing. And what's going to happen there, in my hypothesis, by the way, is that the corporation is going to start to be able to feel and even tangibly measure a return on the giving that they do. And when you find like a return on giving investment that's positive, or what I refer to as a return on generosity, the same decision is going to be made in corporate America or Canada as is made when they find that their return on marketing investment is positive. They're going to spend more money on it. So I think it's really, really important, by the way, for communities to figure out how to create positive return on generosity because it will mean more time, talent, and treasure will be exposed that way. And one of the reasons why giving is going down is because people don't feel that the return on their generosity is positive. And what are you going to do with your money if the return on your investments are always negative? Right? You're going to
Take it
hoard,
out.
you're going to hoard, you're going to go to cash, you're going to, shift sectors, you're going to shift investment managers, you're going to shift something. And look, maybe this is partly the theme of our conversation so far, but the charity sector is no different. It's not different at all.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm excited about seeing how that hypothesis plays out because I think, what a wonderful place to be in this era of digital technology where we don't have to go down any kind of AI tangents, but what I see is in the proper use and application of all of these things that we can do digitally should allow us to be better and more optimal in the places that we're trying to be optimal in, right? And so whether it's health, like you mentioned earlier, or whether it's money, I think both of those technology applied properly should allow and empower more people to be better, to do the things that we're all naturally trying to do but that aren't as easy to do at this point or aren't as rewarding along the journey, right? And I hope to see that happen because I think that would be, not just meaningful on an individual basis, but gosh, on a global basis, because there are organizations out there doing great work that people, once they are able to connect to, absolutely want to see flourish.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. The application and importance of technology in our world at Charitable Impact is about working towards optimizing the donor's journey over
Yeah.
time. It's also important for, scalability and reducing, cost of capital in the sector, but all these things are actually a function, especially cost of capital is in the charity sector is a function of the donor's willingness to participate. And donors are more willing to participate when the journey is meaningful and fulfilling, just like I'm more willing to eat at that restaurant when the journey is meaningful and fulfilling as well.
No, I love that. In the corporate space, let's talk about this a little bit because I know a lot of the listeners that I work with in the association space represent a lot of industry and also have a lot of either, might have their own foundations or all this is intersected on some level. I guess I don't know how far divergent this might be, but we've kind of touched on some of it, so I feel like I want to talk to you about it. Um, the concepts of ESG, a lot of acronyms in there, but how can organizations, publicly, traded companies, entrepreneurs, doesn't matter what part of the marketplace you're, how can we also do well by doing good? What are some of the things that you see happening in that sector that are really, really good that you're excited about in the future?
Well, there's two things that come to mind when you say that. I'll try to speak to them both. The first is like it's really important to make it okay to do well by doing good. Right? There's way too much time wasted on this sort of conversation saying, well, you can't, do well by, working with or facilitating something in the charity sector. I mean, that's just total garbage. The universities that our kids go to, the hospitals that we attend, these are registered charities. It's as if you want the, president of the university, not to be, well paid and incentivized to play or people running the hospital not to be, so that sort of stigma needs to go away. And I actually think that stigma is rooted in illiteracy. I think it's rooted in a lack of true understanding of how important the quote charity sector is to enabling the communities that we live in. But just ask anyone who works in the charity sector how offensive it is to that they're not allowed career progression when everyone else is allowed to, and they're not allowed to get paid well enough to have a mortgage when everyone else supposedly is as well. So the doing well by doing good things really, really important. Plus, there's a lot of social science that corroborates the idea that like it works, right? People do more actively when they feel fulfilled and a sense of meaning towards what they're achieving. So that's one of the part of the answer. With regard to your comment, great comment about ESG, sort of also I think DE&I or diversity, equity, inclusion, also falls into this thing. I think of those two things both as frameworks. And so like if you're a company that wants to do more in the diversity, equity, inclusion world or participate more in the ESG world, the question becomes, well, what are you going to do and how are you going to go about doing that? The short version of where I'm going here is that charitable giving plays a really important component of both of those two frameworks. If you care about environmental or social or governance, charitable giving is a method, it's a vehicle, it's a sector through which to achieve those goals. If you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the charitable giving world is a sector, it's a vehicle through which to achieve those goals. So one of the big problems with ESG and DE&I is no one knowing anything about how to go about achieving them. And one of the results of that is you get a whole bunch of sort of hot air blowing around them with lots of nice sounding speeches and strategies that are hollow. And again, that's where you want to come back and where Charitable Impact comes back and says like, hey, we're here to help you along that journey. You need to want to do it. You need to commit to doing something, but you don't need to have all the answers. Just like buying a house, you don't need to know every single thing about finance and mortgages and credit. And you don't even need to be able to predict the future of what, the Federal Reserve is going to do with interest rates policies. You just have to, want to really invest in a house, think that's important to you, and be willing to take responsibility for your decision making along the way.
No, I'm so glad that you quantified it that way because it's that journey. And the other point that you made is so salient. And I don't think I can say this enough. The data supports why it's good to be a good business, like being good to human beings and the planet. Because guess what? We only got one planet right now, guys. Right? I don't think we're able to live on Mars or the moon yet. So we gotta, these things shouldn't be overly complicated or politicized. And there should be a reward, a return on having a company that functions well and is mindful in those areas. And I think most people, when you talk to them, would say, yeah, of course. Like if I have choice between company A that trashes the environment or company B that doesn't, everybody's going to choose company B. Like it's not a question. It's just that, there's so many layers to all of that. And, obviously everything has been taken down all of these paths that make it very, very divisive. But I think, the nice thing is in the spaces that we operate is that you are able to step back, get some independent verification and say, you know what, let's all move in the right direction because the majority of us want to. And it is a journey that's worth taking and worth taking as far as humanly possible. And I really like, just kind of how you're sharing that and finding additional ways for us all to be effective on that journey. And I want to kind of come home to this concept of impact because I think that that's a word that almost at times becomes a buzzword, but I think it's a really meaningful one when you personalize it. And so impact, as it now we come back to this concept of charity, it's more than just financial, isn't it? But how do you kind of put put it all together for someone in terms of, I want to see impact. What does that all look like? Let's pull all these threads together. What are we going to do to really see that done?
Well, without getting overwhelmed, first of all, it's important to recognize that it's a relatively complicated question.
It is.
First of all, because not everyone's going to agree on the metrics, right?
Right.
I can't tell you how it's a wonderful question. I'm glad we're going here, but I can't tell you how many times like people have tried to leverage my expertise in the benevolent space, for example, to sort of ask me a question like, "Well, tell me what a good charity is." Right. And all you can really do, you can do two things with that. One, you can sort of say, well, I'll give you the characteristics of, generally speaking, the types of things that, make a quote good charity. And the problem with answering that way is you don't always know how much like financial and or community literacy the person has, right? And so, you can ask, Warren Buffett what he thinks the characteristic of a good company is, but if you don't sort of understand the depth of what he's simplifying for you, then the question sort of goes, it gets difficult to translate into action, right? Um, so so impact is first of all a relatively difficult thing because there's no clear metrics. They don't all apply the same, and we don't all measure it the same way. And this is why it's so important to go back to what we talked about earlier, where when you give to things you love, you already actually have way more understanding about how to measure impact than you do about things that you don't love and have never spent any time with, right? So let me give you an analogy. I've got kids and they both play sports. And I had a conversation with one of my kids just this past weekend about like, you know, what he thought the impact of his, play on the soccer pitch was. And if he's 12 now and he takes, or 11 actually, but he takes soccer relatively seriously. And the difference between his ability to answer the question today versus, 4 years ago is totally material. And the difference is he's more mature, he's more experienced, um, and he has chosen to stick with, in this case, soccer. So he's got this like love, right? And so when you ask him today, well, how is the impact of your game? You get a completely different answer. And then you would with someone who's like played their first soccer game and doesn't even really understand the role that they play on the pitch, regardless of how well they carried that role out while they were on the pitch. So, if this sort of resonates with people's thinking, when you think about like impact, it's really, really important to categorize impact into sort of what about measuring impact and what you don't know about measuring impact. And then, sort of with those two boxes, kind of go, okay, well, how much time am I going to go into just verify that like the stuff I do know is actually being done, to my standard? And then how much time am I going to spend learning some new stuff and exploring these areas that I don't know so well? So my message to listeners is that as a donor, I really think that impact is more on you to measure than it is, and you to understand the measurement of, than it is on the charity, for example, to tell you in perfect language that meets your definition of impact, that they are impactful.
I like that because, I think what you are also describing is that journey and that maturation process and that need to be engaged. Um, and again, not be disconnected from what we're doing when it comes to our benevolence and our giving, and to keep our three T's in alignment as much as we can, because yeah, it is this journey, and that's where I like how you shared that answer. Like impact is collective, hard to measure, it's personal, but really what it is a journey, right? It's a continual experience that should change, right? There, I think, until we experience that Shangri-La, I guess, that we're all working to, or whatever the theory is on Earth, right? There's always going to be more that needs to be done, can be done, should be done. So the needle moves, and I think it's more now, like you were saying, a question of, are we going to commit to our component of that in moving the needle and staying true to that, and then being able to encourage others to also do the same. And I really like um kind of how you wove that together pretty effectively. I like
Yeah.
that. It is.
Well,
It's
and
a
it's
complex question.
well, no, and it's the answer is meant to be intuitive, and the unfortunate part of the answer is that there's no easy button. Trying to think of the
Okay.
brand that uses that in their branding, right?
Staples,
Like
easy button. Oh yeah.
Staples, right? So, and you actually, the other thing to say is that now that I've gone there is your job as a donor is to build your own easy button, right? So let me talk about me as a businessman inside my own business. Okay, I founded and I'm the current CEO of Charitable Impact. Um, I have like data and gut understanding of my business that probably supersedes everyone else that works, with the organization. No offense intended to anybody, right? If you brought me on as an advisor to like a benevolent minded, charitable related company, I would be pretty good, pretty fast at understanding, quote, impact of decisions they make inside that business. If you then take me into a financial setting, I would be okay because I come from an investment banking background. I have business and financial literacy, right? But as soon as you start getting me into even businesses that like relate to subject matter that I have no experience with, now the only thing I can do to judge impact is rely on my personal experience also being a business person, right? And that's meant to sound totally intuitive and like there's no other way to do it. I mean, the only other way for you to do that, by the way, is to have someone you truly trust and are willing to, give responsibility to make those types of decisions for you. And so these are the types of decisions, these are the types of conversations that I think are missing on the donor side of the charity world. It's meant to be intuitive. Unfortunately, it's not easy. It's in that like by changing one thing tonight, tomorrow you're going to be an automatically, amazing donor. But the cool part of it is that becoming a more confident donor is fun. And if it's not fun for you, and I don't recommend this very often, if it's totally not fun for you, you either have to shift how you're spending your time, talent, and treasure inside the charity sector, which is the advice that I give. Or, I mean, this is the advice I don't give very often, but I've given before, is just leave because it's not for you at all. Today, people leave the charity sector because they want it to be easy and impactful without putting very much of their time, talent, or treasure towards, making a difference in the world. And that doesn't work for cooking. It doesn't work for sport. It doesn't work for academics. It doesn't work for anything that I'm aware of. It doesn't work for relationships. So why is it going to work for charitable giving? It's not.
Well, I don't think we could land the plane any more effectively than you just did on that point. So I love that. John, any final shout outs that you want to make? Any kind of hurrahs, anything you want to recognize?
Well, in some of this, it sounds like, cynicism. That we're talking about, like, I'm not cynical at all. I'm actually very optimistic of the future of charitable giving, particularly if people and companies take on more responsibility for the decisions they make instead of always sort of blaming the ineffective, bad charities out there. Like it sounds so silly that to me that people do it, but it happens all the time. So I think one of my messages that I'm super optimistic, but like having a better political environment, you got to go out and vote. And the more you engage in civil society and help things out, the better things get, the better you feel about them getting, even if they're not necessarily getting better. The that I'm actually really optimistic about the future of benevolence. But we're in a rough patch, and the message is take on responsibility yourself. It's not going to be anyone else who's going to make the world better, for you. You've got to contribute into it yourself. And the journey of contributing really is fun and meaningful, right? Just like it's so hard to run and so annoying at times to run a business, right? You got internal forces, you got external forces, you got wind in your face all the time. No one ever says thank you. All yada yada yada. And yet it's one of the most meaningful things that you can experience. And so I'm really optimistic about the future of charitable giving, but some hard shifts have to be made in how we as people and corporations approach achieving it. And that's where my message maybe sounds a little bit, pessimistic or cynical. It's actually rooted in a brighter future that I envision myself and wake up every day to try work towards.
Oh, I think I think it is. It's the necessary message, right? It's the let's deal with the real, and do it because I think that there's so many people that do want to see the change, the shift, and want to line things up more effectively and optimize our lives, whether it's technology and all the other things, right? And so, I can't get healthy by sitting on the couch and eating ice cream. I got to do the work and I got to stay engaged, not because I want to look a certain way, because I want to be a certain way. I want to be the person that lives a healthy life because the journey is worth it, right? Runs a business because the journey is worth it and does, makes an impact because the journey is worth it. So I love that. How can people get a hold of you if they wanted to connect with you?
Well, charitableimpact.com. It's on the internets. We're in all the different social medias, at We Are Charitable. Reach out. One of the things we pride ourselves on at Charitable Impact is a really strong support and services group. So we have real human beings who answer the phone and listen to you and help guide you through your charitable giving. Now, we're just working in Canada right now. That's likely to change in the future. But, you know, reach out to us and have a chat. Follow us on social media. If you want to hear our opinion about something, also just let us know. I'm happy to opine into things, and I just need a few questions to answer to get there.
I love it. Well, DJ, because it's been fun.
Ryan, I really
Thanks
appreciated the time. Yeah, and thanks
for the show,
thanks for the conversation. I love the flow, and keep up the good work you're doing.
You do the same.
The information provided in this podcast is not intended as specific tax or legal advice and may not be relied upon for purposes of avoiding any federal tax penalties. The Haney Company, its employees, and representatives are not authorized to give tax or legal advice. Individuals are encouraged to seek advice from their own tax or legal counsel. Individuals involved in the estate planning process should work with an estate planning team, including their own personal, legal, or tax counsel. The information provided here does not constitute personal financial advice, but is meant as the conveyance of information for educational purposes only. All investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Past performance is not indicatory of future returns. Guarantees are backed by the claims-paying ability of the insurer. Brian Heaney is a registered representative and an investment advisory representative of Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC. Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC is not affiliated with the Haney Company. Securities offered through Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC, a U.S. SEC registered investment advisor.